Welcome to another edition of the Flex Rental Solutions How-To Webinars. Today we're going to be going over the permanent setting and the ability to explode contents when returning those items back through the warehouse process. So there are two key settings that we want to go over, and what we want to review is what happens when we scan out a container as it goes out. If there are items inside the container, what happens to them? And then second, what happens when this item returns? There are two things that we'll need to take into consideration is what happens if we scan the container. Are the things inside the container auto-scanned in? Meaning, if you get a green check mark on the container, do the contents get an auto green check mark? And what is the setting to say yes or no for those items? And then the second question is, what happens to those items? Are they left inside the container when they get scanned in? And then the third part of this is, what happens if we scan something that is inside something at the present time during the scan-in process? It would automatically get the green check mark, but does it stay inside the container? So those are the three main things that we're going to go over the whole concept today. To begin with, under inventory settings, there are two settings that we're going to review. The first one is exploding containers on inbound scan. This will be on the new release coming out today, if I'm not mistaken. And the setting here is if you scan the container, meaning the parent item. So as an example, if I had a shipping case and I had a mixer inside that shipping case that wasn't permanent, what happens when I scan the container? Should the scanned item remain inside the case, or should we remove it at the time of scanning the container? The second is a global setting of, should we assume that when we build our unit level content, should those items be permanent by default? So to review, this setting is if you would like to remove the contained items during the scan-in process of scanning the actual case, you would want this explode containers on inbound scan set to yes. And then this is a matter of what happens when we create new models. Should those model settings default to permanent, yes or no? And then once the model has its setting, when we start to put items inside those specific units, those items' permanent checkbox settings will be set from the model level. So model inherits from this setting, units inherit from the model level. So as an example, we're going to go to our cases in here, and I've got an item called just a shipping case A size. And the place where I used to work, we had A sizes, B sizes, and each case had a stencil A01, etc. So if we go to the edit inventory item, there is a contents permanent that is set to no. Again, this field here, when we create a new model, inherits its setting from the inventory model setting contents permanent. So if we created a new model, it would inherit this setting by default. Once you set it, it stays that way. So if we override for this model and say we want these items to be permanent, it will stay that way. We said also that this item can have unit contents. So now, when we go to these specific serial numbers on these cases, as an example, the unit has contents, and as we add items inside of here, it will inherit the permanent checkbox setting for the model. So again, to review, the model settings were contents permanent is no. So as we add very specific items, and take a look. I want to find some items to put in there. 03. Okay. So right now, we have, for all intents and purposes, placed 2 of these specific JBL subwoofers inside this very specific shipping case. If we go over to the right-hand side, there's the permanent checkbox. And as a review, we said when we add units for this model, these items should not be permanently attached to it. So as an example, these 2 items are inside here and they are not permanent. So if we were to go to a pull sheet and create a new pull sheet, and say this is going out today, and I'm going to add 2 of these speakers, these subwoofers, on this quote. And say this job needs 2 subwoofers. And that's all I'm going to say. When we go to our prep screen, if we scan the case, we're going to show you the setting of why the case and the 2 subwoofers show up. Under Projects, Project Elements, Pull Sheets, and we're going to the Shipping and Receiving area. The first thing we're going to do is prep this pull sheet. There's a setting for Container Auto Scan enabled. Auto Detect is basically saying we're going to check anything that is both permanent and non-permanent in any child elements. So anything that's part of that case, if we scan it, it'll auto scan in the child elements that are already inside of it. So that's the setting for if I scan the case, what gets auto put on the pull sheet. So we're going to go down to our prep screen, and we're going to scan 07534. This item is also a free pick container, and we can enter free pick mode to add additional items inside of it. At the present time, I just want to leave what's inside there in there right now, and we'll hit yes.
Free pick container opened.
And we're going to cancel that. So now on our manifest, we have placed the shipping container, and it auto scanned in the 2 JBL subwoofers that were already inside of it. And it has marked the pull sheet of 2 out of 2 subwoofers have been prepped. So that auto scan under Projects, Elements, Pull Sheets, Shipping and Receiving, and Auto Detect Container Auto Scan, that is the setting that will make sure that that item gets placed, that the 2 subwoofers get placed on it. Now the question is, what happens when we come to return these items? There's 2 places where we might return them, either through the free scan-in process or through the warehouse, for now, return manifest. We need to return all 3 of these items. So this is an excellent example of what are our options when we start to receive these. So in a realistic job, if we had 2 cases go out with 2 subwoofers each, when they come back, the reason why we mark these as non-permanent is because in all reality, we cannot assume that these exact subwoofers are going to return in the exact case if we've got more than 1 case and more than 2 subwoofers. So that's why we mark that setting as non-permanent, because I cannot assume that 03153 is inside 07534 on the return. So the question stands, what happens if I scan in the case? Should I automatically get a green checkbox on each of these two items? And then the second question is, should I leave these items inside the case or should I explode them? The third question is, what happens if I open up another case and 03153 is in it and I scan that item? So I haven't scanned in the case yet, but I have scanned in the contents. What is the functionality that should happen? Should I get a green checkbox? That is pretty much taken for granted that if we ever scan in 03153, we knew where it was, we automatically mark it as returned, but should we take it out? So let's review that. If we go back to our explode contents, that's the setting that says when I scan in the parents, we want to take these items out of the case. But let's also go under projects, project elements, and the manifest. And we'll go to shipping and receiving also there. And there is on the return, there is a container auto scanned enabled. And this one is set to just auto scan the permanent items. So this is, if I scan the parent, do I give a green check mark to the child elements? And this setting is only if they are permanent. So the use case scenario for that is, if this is an amp rack with 4 amps bolted in, I can 99% of the time assume that those items are permanently attached to the case, and I don't want to have to scan both the amp rack and the 4 amps. I want to make that assumption, and it's a very valid assumption. So if those items were set as permanent, the auto scan when we scanned in the amp rack would give you a green check mark there, give you a green check mark on each of the amp racks, and because they are permanent, it would also leave them inside there. So that's a review on permanent settings. These items we put as non-permanent. So if I scan in the case, it's going to ask, do you want to virtually scan that in? Yes. Now let's review. Let's go back to this case. And as of now, the case is no longer full. We have virtually stripped it of its contents. If we go back to the amplifier or to the subwoofers themselves are still out on this job. They are just no longer inside the case. And if we go back to this area, we have not returned either of those items yet. We need to verify that we got these in because we don't know if they came back in that shipping case. So now, if we scan that item, we can let that item go back in. And so now, all 3 of the items are returned, and the case itself is empty. And these items are back on the shelf. So if we were to go and rebuild this with new items, we could go back to our Contents tab. And put these items back in. And now they're ready to go out. So we've repackaged them. If there were different items inside the case, we could just scan the case in this content builder mode and put the new items inside there. So that's the functionality and how all these tie together. The permanent checkbox is whether the item should auto scan back in and remain inside when you scan in the parent or the child item. The non-permanent normally means I want to return the case only. Don't assume the contents came back, but as they come back, that we can remove them out of the case. So that is the functionality that we're looking to really polish and look at different ways that we can make this work for different types of gear. Again, every single item inside your warehouse might be a little bit different. If you have fly packages that, again, stay built, I would put those items as permanent so that when we scan them out, that they default and stay as permanent. You can always override a very specific item. Even though this model is set to permanent, we can, once we build it, check that, that we can check individual items as permanent or not, so we can override the individual settings. With that, I want to thank you for your time. If you've got any questions, please contact support@flexrentalsolutions.com. Thanks.